I'm standing on my own dock at 6 a.m., coffee in hand, when 3 police cruisers come screaming down my driveway in Willowbrook Estates. The HOA president is pointing at me like I'm public enemy number 1, screaming that I'm illegally fishing on community property. The irony? I've owned this 5-acre lake since 2009, and these people have been trespassing on my land for years. But here's what Karen and her board don't know. I'm not just some electrician they can push around. I've got 38 years of property deeds, $400, 0 cents worth of trail cameras, and a very patient attorney on speed dial. What would you do if your HOA tried to steal your family's lake? Drop a comment below, because what happens next is the most satisfying legal destruction I've ever witnessed. These entitled bureaucrats picked the wrong property owner to mess with. My name's Mike, and I'm a 42-year-old electrician who thought he'd inherited a slice of paradise when my grandfather passed in 2009. 5 acres of pristine woodland with a 2-acre spring-fed lake that had been in our family since 1987. Every morning I'd walk down to the water's edge, breathing in that crisp scent of pine needles mixed with the earthy smell of lake water, listening to the haunting call of loons echoing across the surface. The morning mist would rise like ghosts dancing on the water, and I'd cast my first line feeling like the luckiest man alive. Back when Grandpa bought this land, it was nothing but forest and farmland for miles. He got it for a steal. Developers hadn't discovered our little corner of the county yet. The lake was stocked with largemouth bass and bluegill, fed by natural springs that kept the water clean and cold year-round. I have the original deed, the survey markers, and 38 years of property tax receipts. Never once was ownership disputed. But paradise has a way of attracting snakes. Between 2012 and 2015, luxury subdivision Willowbrook Estates sprouted up like mushrooms after rain. Suddenly, my quiet forest retreat was surrounded by $400,000 0 cents to $600,000 0 cents homes, filled with upper-middle-class families and retirees who'd moved here expecting resort-style amenities. Many of these folks took one look at my lake and assumed it came with their property package. The first hints of trouble started in 2018. Polite requests at first. Could their kids fish from my dock? Would I mind if they brought their kayaks over on weekends? I'm not unreasonable. I said sure, occasionally, but asked them to check with me first. Common courtesy, right? Then the complaints started. Anonymous calls to the county about mosquito problems from standing water. Passive-aggressive comments at the gas station about how some people don't maintain their property properly. I started noticing beer cans and fishing line left around my shoreline. Enter Karen Whitfield, stage left, like a villain in a bad soap opera. Karen moved here from California in 2019, in the mid-50s, perfectly styled blonde bob that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill, and drove a white Mercedes SUV that she parked like she owned every space in town. She was a retired marketing executive with the kind of smile that never reached her eyes, and an impressive talent for making suggestions sound like orders. Within 6 months of moving in, Karen was elected HOA president. I should have seen the writing on the wall when she started her campaign promising to enhance property values through community standards enforcement. Translation, she was going to make everyone's life miserable until they bent to her will. The first major incident happened on a Saturday morning in early 2023. I was heading down to the lake with my coffee, looking forward to some peaceful fishing, when I heard the mechanical whine of a cordless drill. Someone was installing signs around my property. No trespassing signs. On my land, without permission. I marched over to find Karen herself, dressed in what I can only describe as suburban safari wear, directing 2 guys with a post hole digger. The smell of her overpowering floral perfume hit me before I was even within talking distance. "Excuse me," I said, keeping my voice level. "What are you doing?" She turned around with that practiced smile, her heels clicking on the asphalt driveway. "Oh, Mike, just helping to clarify property boundaries for everyone's benefit. You understand?" "I understand you're putting signs on my property without permission?" Her smile faltered. "Well, there's been some confusion about public access to community amenities." "There's no confusion. This is private property. These signs come down now." That's when I saw the real Karen for the first time. The mask slipped, and underneath was pure entitlement, wrapped in righteous indignation. "I don't think you understand your position here," she said, her voice dropping to that dangerous whisper rich people use when they're about to threaten you. "This neighborhood has standards. Some people just don't fit. And that, friends, was the declaration of war. 2 weeks later, I learned Karen didn't appreciate having her authority questioned. I was enjoying my usual early morning fishing ritual, coffee still steaming in the cool air, that first cast of the day arcing perfectly over the water, when I heard car doors slamming, multiple car doors. Karen appeared through the tree line like she was leading a military operation, flanked by 3 other HOA board members I barely recognized. "Mr. Henderson," she announced, using my last name like we were in court, "we need to discuss your ongoing violations of community standards." I looked around at my own property, my own lake, holding my own fishing rod. "I'm sorry, what now?" Karen's lackey, a nervous-looking guy named Brad who always wore polo shirts like it was a uniform, stepped forward with an official-looking envelope. "This is a cease and desist order from our attorney regarding your disruption of community peace and unauthorized use of shared recreational facilities." The taste of my morning coffee turned bitter in my mouth. I could hear my fishing reel spinning loose in the silence as I processed what they'd just said. "Shared recreational facilities?" I repeated. "You mean my private lake that I own?" "The HOA has determined that certain amenities impact community property values and therefore fall under our jurisdiction," Karen said, reading from what looked like a prepared script. "Continued violations will result in daily fines of $200.00, with potential liens against your property. Here's the thing about bullies. They count on you being too shocked to respond effectively. They ambush you, overwhelm you with official-sounding nonsense, and hope you'll crumble under pressure. Karen had clearly done this before, but I'd been raised by a grandfather who taught me that when someone threatens your livelihood, you don't get mad, you get smart. "I'll need to review this with my attorney," is all I said. Karen's smile widened like she'd won something. That weekend, I spent 12 hours at the county recorder's office digging through public records. Best $20.00 I ever spent on parking meters. What I found was fascinating. The Willowbrook Estates HOA was incorporated in March 2014, 2 full years after I inherited my property in 2009. Here's a knowledge nugget for anyone dealing with HOA overreach. An HOA formed after you already own your property has 0 legal authority over you. They can't retroactively claim jurisdiction over existing landowners. It's like starting a book club and then demanding that everyone who already owns books has to follow your reading rules. Armed with this information, I did something Karen probably didn't expect. I hired a real attorney. Cost me $500.00 for the consultation, but money well spent. Within 48 hours, my lawyer sent a cease and desist letter to the HOA demanding they stop their harassment campaign immediately. Then I went on the offensive. I posted copies of my property survey and deed on the neighborhood Facebook group, along with a polite explanation of actual property boundaries. The response was immediate and eye-opening. Several neighbors commented with support, and a few even shared their own stories of Karen's overreach. Karen's countermove was predictably petty. She deleted my posts, blocked me from the group, and posted her own message claiming I was harassing board members and creating a hostile environment for families. But here's where Karen made her first major tactical error. She escalated to government authorities. 3 days later, a city code enforcement officer showed up at my door with a clipboard and a confused expression. Apparently, someone had filed a complaint claiming my property was in violation of 17 different municipal codes. "Honestly," the inspector said, looking around my well-maintained property, "I'm not sure why I'm here. Everything looks fine. Someone claimed you were running an illegal campground?" "Did they mention who filed the complaint?" He checked his paperwork. "Says here, concerned neighbor. But between you and me, most of our anonymous complaints come from the same phone number." He glanced toward the subdivision and shook his head. "Some people have too much time on their hands." The inspection took 20 minutes. 0 violations found. The inspector even complimented my dock construction. But Karen wasn't done. That evening, I got a call from Jim Martinez, my neighbor who lived closest to the subdivision. Jim was a retired high school teacher, salt-of-the-earth type who'd been watching this drama unfold with growing concern. "Mike," he said, "I think you should know what Karen's saying at the board meetings." "What now?" "She's telling people you threatened her physically, says she's afraid to walk her dog past your property." I felt my blood pressure spike. "Jim, I've never even raised my voice at that woman." I know that, and you know that, but she's got some folks scared. Thing is, there are others getting fed up with her power trips. You're not her only target. As I hung up the phone, I realized this was bigger than just my lake. Karen was building a pattern of intimidation, and I was just her latest project. Time to start documenting everything. Karen apparently decided that if one government agency wouldn't help her, she'd try them all. The next month felt like bureaucratic whack-a-mole. First, another code enforcement visit, this time with a list of 23 supposed violations Karen had helpfully provided. Everything from improper dock construction to unauthorized vegetation removal. The inspector spent 3 hours going through the list with the enthusiasm of someone auditing tax returns. "Ma'am," he finally told me, "whoever filed this complaint either has very poor eyesight or a very active imagination. Your property is cleaner than most city parks." Then came the state wildlife department. Apparently someone reported me for commercial fishing operations on my private lake. The officer who showed up was a friendly guy named Dave who took one look at my single fishing rod and tackle box and started laughing. "Let me guess," Dave said. "HOA dispute? How'd you know? You'd be amazed how often we get called about illegal fishing that turns out to be someone fishing their own pond. Usually involves a neighbor who thinks they know more about wildlife law than wildlife officers do." But Karen's masterpiece was the social media campaign. She created a Facebook group called Willowbrook Community Safety and started posting daily updates about various threats to neighborhood tranquility. My morning fishing somehow became early morning disturbances affecting property values. The isolation tactics were more subtle but equally annoying. Suddenly, I wasn't invited to the annual block party I'd attended for years. Neighbors who used to wave started looking the other way. Even the mailman mentioned that some folks had been asking questions about my activities. Time for deeper research. I spent another weekend in the public records office, this time diving into the HOA's formation documents. What I found made my electrician's attention to detail very, very happy. The original 2014 HOA incorporation clearly excluded my property from their boundaries. But there was an amendment filed in 2019 that somehow magically expanded their jurisdiction to include my land. Now here's another knowledge nugget. Property cannot be added to an HOA without the owner's written consent. They can't just vote you in like you're joining a club. It's like your neighbor deciding your garage is now part of their homeowners association. Completely illegal, but people try it anyway because most folks don't know the law. I took this information straight to my attorney, who immediately perked up like a hunting dog catching a scent. "Mike," he said, "this is fraudulent. They've been operating under false jurisdiction for 4 years. We can not only get them to back off, we can go after them for harassment under color of law." The attorney sent another letter, this one with significantly sharper teeth, threatening a lawsuit for fraudulent boundary claims and demanding immediate cessation of all enforcement actions against my property. The HOA board caved faster than a house of cards in a hurricane. At their next meeting, they voted to temporarily suspend any enforcement actions while they reviewed jurisdictional questions. Karen was reportedly furious, but I thought I'd won. Big mistake. Never underestimate a narcissist who's been publicly embarrassed. Karen shifted tactics from pseudo-legal harassment to personal attacks. She started questioning my family background at neighborhood gatherings, making snide comments about people who don't understand community values, and wondering aloud whether certain residents were really the right fit for Willowbrook. The smell of diesel exhaust and the crunch of gravel under tires announced her next escalation. I was replacing a light fixture on my front porch when Karen's Mercedes pulled into my driveway, followed by a police cruiser. My stomach dropped. What had she done now? The officer approached cautiously while Karen stayed by her car, arms crossed, wearing an expression of righteous vindication. "Sir, we received a report of threats made against a neighborhood resident. Mind if we ask you a few questions?" "Threats? Officer, I haven't threatened anyone. Ma'am says you approached her aggressively yesterday evening and made statements about making her pay for interfering with your property." I stared at Karen, who was nodding earnestly at the officer. "Officer, I was in my workshop all evening yesterday. I haven't spoken to this woman in weeks. Do you have any way to verify that?" Thank God for security cameras. I'd installed them the month before, mainly to keep an eye on the lake when I wasn't home. The footage clearly showed me working in my shop from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. the previous evening, exactly when Karen claimed I'd confronted her. The officer reviewed the footage on my phone, then walked back to Karen. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I could see her face getting redder by the minute. When he returned, he looked apologetic. "Sir, I'm going to file a report about filing false police reports. That's a misdemeanor in this county. You might want to consider a harassment complaint of your own." As Karen drove away, tires squealing slightly on the asphalt, the officer shook his head. "Between you and me," he said, "we know that address. Gets kind of exhausting, you know. Any advice? Document everything. People like this usually hang themselves eventually. You just need enough rope." The false police report backfired on Karen in ways she probably didn't expect. When the officer mentioned my security cameras, something clicked in my brain. If I had cameras watching my property, what else might they have captured? That evening, I walked the perimeter of my land with fresh eyes. Near the back corner, where my property line bordered the subdivision, I found something that made my blood boil. A well-worn footpath leading from the housing development straight to my lake. Not just any path. This thing was established. Trampled earth, broken branches, even some makeshift stepping stones across the boggy section. Following the trail to its end, I discovered what can only be described as an unauthorized beach club. Someone had built a crude dock extension onto my existing structure. There were permanent-looking Adirondack chairs arranged around a stone fire pit, fishing rod holders bolted to trees, and a weathered cooler chained to an oak tree. The smell of old charcoal and stale beer hung in the air like evidence of countless trespassing parties I'd never known about. I installed trail cameras that weekend, 6 of them, motion-activated with night vision strategically placed to cover every angle of the unauthorized access route. Cost me $400, 0 cents, but I had a feeling it would be worth every penny. The footage was absolutely stunning. Over the next 2 weeks, I documented 47 separate instances of trespassing. Families having picnics, teenagers throwing parties, adults hosting fishing tournaments. One memorable night captured what appeared to be a full-blown barbecue with at least 20 people. But the real jackpot was Karen herself, appearing in the footage no fewer than 8 times. Karen who claimed to be afraid of me. Karen who'd called the police about my threatening behavior. There she was, bold as brass, using my lake like her personal resort. Time for some detective work. Jim Martinez had become my unofficial intelligence network, and he delivered information that made the trespassing suddenly make sense. "Mike, you need to see this," he said, showing me a copy of the HOA's annual budget. "Look at line item 47. Lake maintenance. $15,000, 0 cents over 3 years. They've been charging residents for maintaining your lake," Jim explained. Karen told everyone the HOA was responsible for keeping the community water feature in good condition. Here's a knowledge nugget that'll blow your mind. Always audit HOA budgets if you suspect fraud. They often include expenses for property they don't actually own or maintain. It's like your neighbor charging you for washing their car and calling it community vehicle maintenance. But it got worse. Jim had also obtained a copy of the HOA's insurance policy through a friend on the board. Listed right there under covered properties was my lake, described as community recreational water feature. Let that sink in for a moment. The HOA was collecting insurance premiums from residents to cover property they didn't own, while I was paying separate insurance and bearing all the liability risk for people using my land without permission. I called my attorney immediately. "Mike," he said after reviewing the evidence, "this isn't just harassment anymore. This is fraud, multiple counts, tax fraud, insurance fraud, probably theft of services. We're talking potential criminal charges." The power dynamic had just shifted dramatically in my favor. Karen, meanwhile, was busy digging her hole deeper. At the next HOA meeting, which Jim faithfully reported to me, she announced that the board was considering emergency measures to deal with ongoing security threats from certain property owners. "She's talking about installing security cameras pointed at your property," Jim told me. "Claims it's for community protection." "Let her," I said. "I'd love to have more footage of people trespassing on my land." But Karen's most telling comment came when someone asked about the lake maintenance budget. "Some people," she said, her voice dripping with disdain, don't understand that living in a quality community comes with certain responsibilities. If they can't contribute to shared amenities, perhaps they should consider living somewhere more suitable to their circumstances. The barely concealed classism was getting harder for even her supporters to ignore. That's when I realized Karen's fatal flaw. She genuinely believed she was entitled to my property simply because she wanted it. In her mind, the lake should belong to the neighborhood because it would make her life more pleasant. My legal ownership was just an inconvenient technicality to be worked around. I spent the next week organizing my evidence like a prosecutor preparing for trial. Security footage, financial records, insurance documents, witness statements from Jim and others. The timeline was becoming crystal clear. The HOA had been systematically defrauding both me and their own residents for years. But I wanted more than just legal victory. I wanted accountability. And I was about to discover that Karen had given me everything I needed to destroy her completely. The bombshell arrived in my mailbox on a Tuesday morning, disguised as routine government correspondence. I was sorting through the usual bills and junk mail when I spotted an envelope from the county assessor's office regarding a property tax assessment appeal review. Weird. I hadn't filed any appeals. My property taxes were reasonable and I'd never had issues with the assessment. Opening the letter, I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. The Willowbrook Estates HOA was listed as a co-applicant requesting a reduction in my property's assessed value due to shared recreational facilities reducing individual property tax burden. They were claiming partial ownership of my lake for tax purposes. I drove straight to the assessor's office, letter clutched in my hand like evidence of a crime, which, it turned out, it basically was. "Ma'am," I asked the clerk, "can you explain how someone else can file tax appeals on property they don't own?" She pulled up my file on her computer, frowning at the screen. "This is unusual. According to this application, the HOA claims to maintain and insure the water feature, therefore qualifying for partial tax relief under shared amenity provisions. They don't own, maintain, or insure anything on my property. Do you have documentation proving sole ownership?" I slapped my deed on her counter. "Owned by my family since 1987, never been shared ownership." Her frown deepened. "Sir, if this application contains false information, that's tax fraud. We'll need to investigate this immediately." Tax fraud. The words hit me like lightning. I drove home in a daze, but my brain was racing. If Karen was bold enough to commit tax fraud, what else might she be lying about? I spent the rest of the day cross-referencing every document I could find. The insurance revelation was even more infuriating. I called my homeowner's insurance company and asked a simple question. If someone else's insurance policy lists my property as covered, what does that mean legally? "Well," the agent said, "either there's been a mistake or someone's committing insurance fraud. You can't insure property you don't own. That's like me taking out life insurance on a stranger. And if someone's been collecting premiums from people to cover property they don't own, that would be theft, plain and simple." The scope of Karen's fraud was staggering. She wasn't just harassing me, she was systematically stealing from her own neighbors while committing multiple felonies. But the real kicker came when Jim called that evening with intelligence from his wife, who worked at the bank. "Mike, you're not going to believe this. Karen's husband filed for business bankruptcy last month. They're in serious financial trouble." Suddenly, Karen's behavior made perfect sense. She wasn't just a power-hungry narcissist, she was a desperate woman trying to maintain her lifestyle and social status while her world crumbled around her. The HOA presidency wasn't just about control, it was about survival. She needed the position for her resume, for her reputation, for her sense of self-worth, which meant she'd fight to the death to keep it. "Jim," I said, "what would happen if Karen lost the HOA election?" She'd be humiliated. Probably have to move. Everyone would know about the bankruptcy, the fraud, everything. I hung up the phone with a new understanding of my opponent. This wasn't just about my lake anymore. Karen had bet everything on her ability to intimidate me into submission. She'd committed multiple crimes, alienated half the neighborhood, and destroyed her credibility with local authorities. She was cornered, desperate, and dangerous. But I now held enough evidence to destroy her completely. Tax fraud, insurance fraud, theft, trespassing, filing false police reports. Any one of these could result in criminal charges. Together, they painted a picture of someone who'd lost all perspective on reality. The next morning, I made 3 phone calls. First, to my attorney, who nearly dropped the phone when I explained the tax situation. Second, to the district attorney's office to file criminal complaints. Third, to that local newspaper reporter who'd been sniffing around the story. This is bigger than a property dispute, I told the reporter. This is organized fraud targeting an entire community. Karen had wanted to play hardball. Time to show her what a real power play looked like. Time to build a case that would make a prosecutor weep with joy. First stop, upgrading my legal team. My original attorney was great for property disputes, but I needed someone who specialized in HOA fraud and had courtroom experience with white-collar crime. After 3 consultations, I found Sarah Chen, a litigation specialist who'd made her reputation taking down corrupt community associations. "Mike," she said after reviewing my evidence, "this is a prosecutor's dream. We're talking about a pattern of fraud spanning multiple years, multiple victims, and multiple agencies. I'll take this on contingency because I'm confident we'll win big." The beauty of a contingency arrangement? I wouldn't pay unless we won, and Sarah was confident enough to bet her time on our success. Next came the professional evidence compilation. Sarah recommended a forensic accountant to analyze the HOA's financial records, all of which were public information that Jim had been helpfully collecting. The accountant's preliminary report was damning. $47,000, 0 cents in questionable expenses over 4 years, including the lake maintenance fraud, unauthorized legal fees, and what appeared to be personal expenses disguised as community management costs. But we needed more than financial records. I hired a professional land surveyor to create an updated court-admissible survey of my property boundaries. Cost me $800, 0 cents. But here's a crucial knowledge nugget. Professional surveys are worth every penny when fighting property disputes. They're legally admissible evidence that carries more weight than any HOA map or neighborly agreement. Never trust amateur boundary marking when your property rights are at stake. Meanwhile, Jim was building our community intelligence network. Turns out, Karen's reign of terror had created more enemies than allies. 6 other residents were quietly documenting their own harassment stories, and a retired accountant named Mrs. Patterson volunteered to help analyze the HOA's books. Karen tried to fine me $500, 0 cents for having the wrong shade of mailbox, Mrs. Patterson told me. When I asked to see the regulation she was citing, she said community standards don't need to be written down. That's when I knew she was making it up as she went along. The trail camera surveillance was producing comedy gold. In addition to the trespassing footage, I'd captured Karen herself conducting what appeared to be reconnaissance missions around my property, sometimes with a measuring tape. One particularly entertaining clip showed her trying to move one of my survey markers, apparently not realizing that tampering with property boundaries is a felony. I upgraded my camera system with night vision and added 2 more units covering angles I'd missed. The goal wasn't just documentation, it was creating an overwhelming volume of evidence that would make denial impossible. Sarah connected me with an investigative reporter from the county newspaper who specialized in local corruption stories. Lisa Martinez, no relation to Jim, had been tracking HOA abuse cases across the region and was thrilled to find such a well-documented example. "This hits all the buttons," Lisa explained. "Fraud, abuse of power, targeting working-class families, elderly victims. Plus you've got actual evidence instead of just complaints. When can we schedule interviews with your neighbors?" The criminal complaints were progressing faster than expected. The district attorney's office assigned an investigator who seemed genuinely excited about the case. Apparently, white-collar crime in suburban community associations was a growing problem, and they'd been looking for a solid case to set precedent. "We've got tax fraud, insurance fraud, filing false police reports, and theft of services," Detective Rodriguez explained. "Plus harassment, possibly extortion, depending on how we interpret the fine threats. Your documentation is exceptional. Most people don't think to save everything like you did." The insurance investigation was moving forward too. Karen's insurance company was not happy to discover they'd been collecting premiums under false pretenses. They'd opened a fraud investigation and were considering criminal referrals of their own. All the pieces were falling into place for a coordinated offensive. The plan was elegant in its simplicity, simultaneous legal, criminal, and media pressure that would make denial or cover-up impossible. I spent evenings organizing evidence files, creating timelines, and coordinating with our growing team of allies. The smell of printer ink and the sound of paper shuffling became my evening soundtrack. But underneath the administrative tedium, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: genuine confidence. Karen thought she was fighting someone she could intimidate. Instead, she'd picked a fight with someone who understood that documentation, patience, and systematic preparation beat emotional tantrums every time. The community was starting to turn against her, too. Word was spreading about the financial irregularities, and several residents were asking pointed questions at HOA meetings. Karen's support base was cracking. Time for the final phase, letting Karen destroy herself while the cameras rolled. Karen's desperation manifested in ways I never could have predicted. The first sign came on a Monday morning when I discovered my dock had been vandalized overnight. Someone had taken a crowbar to the decking and cut my fishing line's storage. My tackle box, which I'd stupidly left outside, was gone entirely. About $200, 0 cents worth of lures and equipment that had belonged to my grandfather. The smell of fresh wood splinters mixed with lake water told the story of recent destruction, and my trail cameras had captured every detail in high-definition glory. The footage showed 2 teenagers I didn't recognize doing the dirty work around 2 a.m., but the real prize was the wide shot that caught Karen's white Mercedes parked on the road nearby. Engine running, headlights off. "Amateur hour," Detective Rodriguez said when I showed him the footage. "Conspiracy to commit vandalism, plus using minors to commit crimes. She's really going for the full felony collection." But Karen wasn't done. Over the next 2 weeks, I received a barrage of anonymous complaints filed with every government agency imaginable. Code enforcement got reports about unpermitted structures and environmental hazards. The health department heard about standing water breeding mosquitoes. Someone even called the fire marshal, claiming I was storing flammable materials near a water source. The most creative complaint went to the state environmental agency, claiming my fishing was disrupting endangered waterfowl nesting. The biologist who came to investigate was actually impressed with my lake's ecosystem. "Whoever filed this complaint doesn't know much about local wildlife," she told me. "You've got one of the healthiest small lake environments I've seen in years. Keep doing whatever you're doing." Karen's social media campaign escalated to all-out character assassination. Fake reviews appeared on my business website claiming I was unreliable and hostile to customers. Someone created a fake Facebook profile using an old photo from my company website and posted inflammatory comments on local business pages. But her masterstroke of stupidity came when she tried to turn my own customers against me. I was finishing a residential electrical job when the homeowner approached me with an uncomfortable expression. "Mike, I need to ask you something. Someone called me yesterday claiming you were under investigation for fraud. They said I should be careful about paying you." "Who called you?" "Wouldn't give a name. Said they were from the Community Safety Committee, but the caller ID showed a local number. That evening, I cross-referenced the number. It belonged to Karen's landline. Here's where Karen made a critical tactical error. She went after my livelihood. Up until that point, this had been about property and principle, but attacking my business? That was war. Sarah Chen was practically salivating when I told her about the business interference. "Portia's interference with business relationships," she said. "That's big money damages. We can now sue for lost income, reputation damage, emotional distress. Karen just turned a property dispute into a 6-figure lawsuit." But the real entertainment came when Karen decided to get creative with law enforcement. I was replacing outlet covers in my kitchen when I heard the familiar sound of multiple vehicles in my driveway. This time it wasn't just police. It was police, paramedics, and a fire truck. "Sir, we received a 911 call about someone having a medical emergency at this address," the paramedic explained. Caller said an elderly man had collapsed and wasn't breathing. "I'm the only person here, and as you can see, I'm fine." "False emergency calls are a felony," the police officer said grimly. "This is the 3rd one this month from your neighborhood. Someone's trying to tie up emergency resources." The 911 recordings, which became public record after the investigation, were pure gold. Karen's voice was clearly identifiable on 2 of the 3 calls, despite her attempts to disguise it. She'd reported a heart attack, a possible drowning, and shots fired at my address. Each false emergency call was a separate felony charge. But Karen's pièce de résistance was her attempt at bribery. I was checking my mail when she appeared like a bad omen, walking up my driveway with the confidence of someone who thought she held all the cards. "Mike," she said, "I think we can resolve this situation like adults." I kept my phone recording in my pocket. a habit I'd developed after the false police report. I'm listening. The HOA is prepared to offer you $25,000, 0 cents cash, plus exclusive fishing privileges for your family in exchange for your cooperation in resolving our boundary disagreement. Cooperation meaning what exactly? You withdraw your complaints, we formalize a shared use agreement for the lake, and everyone wins. And if I don't agree? Her smile turned predatory. Well, these legal battles can be very expensive and very public. Small business owners can't afford that kind of attention. I had it all on recording. Attempted bribery, extortion, and threats, all captured in Karen's own voice. The beautiful irony, Karen thought she was offering me a way out when she was actually handing me the final nail for her coffin. Karen's final gambit was so outrageous it bordered on comedy, if it hadn't been potentially devastating to my property and health. 2 days after her failed bribery attempt, I received an official-looking letter from the city's environmental health department. Someone had filed a complaint claiming my lake was contaminated with hazardous runoff that posed a significant public health risk to the surrounding community. The complaint was detailed, technical, and completely fabricated. It claimed chemical analysis had detected elevated levels of petroleum products and heavy metals in the water, supposedly from my electrical work equipment being stored too close to the shoreline. When the environmental inspector arrived, he brought a full hazmat team and looked ready to declare my property a Superfund site. "Sir, we're going to need to test every inch of this water," he said, suiting up like he was entering Chernobyl. "If these contamination levels are accurate, we'll have to condemn the property immediately." My stomach dropped. A contamination finding could not only destroy my property value, it could bankrupt me with cleanup costs. But here's the thing about actual environmental professionals. They know their business. After 30 minutes of testing, the inspector started looking confused. "This is some of the cleanest natural water I've ever tested," he said, pulling off his protective gear. "Whoever filed this complaint either used fake test results or completely made up the data." Fake test results? The complaint included a lab report claiming to be from AccuTest Environmental. I called them this morning. They've never heard of your property, never tested water from this address. Creating fake government documents is a federal crime. But Karen wasn't done destroying herself. That same week, she attempted to organize a boycott of any local business that served me. She created flyers claiming I was under investigation for environmental crimes and a threat to community safety. The flyers were distributed to every business in town, complete with my photo and a warning that supporting dangerous individuals enables community harm. The response from local business owners was swift and unanimous. They called it harassment and threw the flyers in the trash. Several shop owners contacted me directly to express support and share copies of Karen's insane manifesto. "Mike," said Tom from the hardware store, "in 30 years of business, I've never seen anything this crazy. She's making herself look like a lunatic." But Karen's masterpiece of self-destruction came when she decided to take her case to social media with a public video. Jim Martinez sent me the link with the message. "You have to see this. She's completely lost it." The video was a 20-minute rant posted to the neighborhood Facebook group, filmed in Karen's living room with the kind of lighting that made her look like a horror movie villain. She claimed I was part of a conspiracy to destroy property values and that my lake was illegally harboring criminal activity. The conspiracy theory got wilder as the video progressed. According to Karen, I was working with outside agitators to take over the neighborhood, and my phishing was actually coded signals to criminal associates. The comments section was pure gold, neighbors responding with confusion, disbelief, and growing concern for Karen's mental state. Several people suggested she seek help, and one neighbor flatly called her delusional. But the real kicker came at the end of the video when Karen made direct threats. If the authorities won't protect this community from dangerous individuals, residents may need to take matters into their own hands. Sometimes good people have to make hard choices to preserve their way of life. Threatening vigilante action against a neighbor on a public forum while claiming they're a criminal? That's textbook harassment with implied threats of violence. I forwarded the video to Detective Rodriguez, who watched it with the kind of fascination usually reserved for nature documentaries about predators making fatal mistakes. "Mike, she's basically confessing to a campaign of harassment while threatening future violence. This video alone is enough for criminal charges." The community response was immediate and decisive. By the next HOA meeting, 6 board members had submitted written demands for Karen's resignation. The subdivision's property management company sent a formal letter stating they would terminate their contract if the harassment continued. Karen's support base had evaporated completely. Even her closest allies were distancing themselves, terrified of being associated with someone who'd gone full conspiracy theorist in public. The smell of victory was in the air, mixed with the clean scent of morning lake water. My trail cameras were still capturing daily evidence. My attorney was preparing multiple lawsuits, and criminal investigators were building cases that could put Karen behind bars. But I wanted more than just legal victory. I wanted Karen's public humiliation to be complete, witnessed by the entire community that had watched her try to destroy me. The monthly town hall meeting was coming up, and I had a plan that would end this once and for all. Time to let Karen hang herself with her own rope in front of everyone who mattered. The Willowbrook Community Center had never seen a crowd like this. What should have been a routine monthly town hall meeting had turned into the social event of the year. Word had spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Mike Henderson was finally going to face off with Karen Whitfield in public, and nobody wanted to miss the fireworks. I arrived 15 minutes early to find the parking lot already packed. Cars lined the street for 3 blocks, and I could see neighbors streaming toward the building with the eager anticipation usually reserved for championship games. The buzz of excited conversation filled the evening air like electricity before a thunderstorm. Inside, every seat was filled, with people standing along the walls and crowding near the doors. I spotted familiar faces throughout the crowd. Jim Martinez gave me a supportive nod. Mrs. Patterson smiled encouragingly, and even some of my electrical customers had shown up to watch. The local newspaper photographer was setting up in the corner, and I was surprised to see a camera crew from the regional TV station. Karen sat in the front row, surrounded by empty chairs like a quarantine zone. She was dressed in what I can only describe as courtroom formal, a navy blazer and pearls that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, but her perfectly styled exterior couldn't hide the tension radiating from her like heat from pavement. Mayor Johnson called the meeting to order, his voice barely audible over the murmur of 150-plus residents packed into a space designed for maybe 80. Ladies and gentlemen, we have an unusual situation tonight. Mrs. Whitfield has requested time to address what she calls ongoing threats to community safety, and Mr. Henderson has requested equal time to respond. Mrs. Whitfield, you have the floor. Karen stood up with the confidence of someone who still believed she could control the narrative. Her heels clicked across the linoleum as she approached the podium, and I caught a whiff of that overwhelming floral perfume that had become her signature. Thank you, Mayor Johnson. I'm here tonight because this community faces a serious threat to our safety, our property values, and our way of life. She launched into a prepared speech about dangerous individuals who refuse to respect community standards and use intimidation tactics against law-abiding families. According to Karen, I was everything from an environmental hazard to a criminal mastermind running some sort of lake-based operation. The crowd's reaction was immediate and unmistakable. Eye rolls, head shakes, and barely suppressed snickers rippled through the audience. Someone in the back actually laughed out loud when Karen claimed I was illegally operating commercial fishing activities. After 10 minutes of increasingly unhinged accusations, Karen concluded with a dramatic flourish. If our elected officials won't protect us from this individual's criminal behavior, then concerned citizens may have no choice but to take action ourselves. The room fell silent. Even Karen seemed to realize she'd just threatened vigilante violence in front of 150 witnesses and a TV camera. Mayor Johnson looked uncomfortable. Mr. Henderson, your response? I walked to the podium carrying a single manila folder, feeling remarkably calm despite the weight of the moment. This was it. Months of documentation, investigation, and patience, all leading to this moment. Thank you, Mayor Johnson. I'd like to start with a simple question. I opened my folder and pulled out the first exhibit, my property deed. Mrs. Whitfield, this document shows I've owned 5 acres, including a private lake, since 2009. Could you explain why your HOA has spent $15,000 0 cents over 4 years maintaining property you don't own? The crowd stirred. Karen's face flushed, but she remained silent. Perhaps you could explain why your HOA's insurance policy lists my private lake as a covered community amenity? I had displayed the insurance documents on the projector screen. Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Or maybe you'd like to discuss why you filed tax appeals, claiming partial ownership of my property to reduce the HOA's tax burden? Karen shot to her feet. This is harassment. He's twisting. Ma'am, Mayor Johnson interrupted. Please let Mr. Henderson finish. I pulled out my phone and connected it to the sound system. Mrs. Wickfield, last week you offered me $25,000, 0 cents, to withdraw my complaints against the HOA. Would you like to explain to everyone what you meant when you said small business owners can't afford legal attention? I played the recording. Karen's voice filled the room, clear as day, offering bribes and making threats. The crowd erupted. Shouts of, "What the hell?" and "Are you kidding me?" echoed through the building. Several people were on their phones, presumably recording or sharing updates. Karen was standing now, her face cycling through shades of red that shouldn't exist in nature. "You recorded me without consent. That's illegal." "Actually," I said calmly, "Virginia is a one-party consent state." But here's my favorite part. I clicked to the next slide. Trail camera footage of Karen and 2 teenagers vandalizing my dock. "Would you like to explain why you were supervising minors committing felony vandalism at 2 a.m.? That's when Karen completely lost it. "This is a conspiracy," she screamed. "He's working with criminals to destroy our neighborhood. Someone needs to stop him before—" The room fell silent as Sheriff Williams walked through the back door, flanked by 2 deputies. Perfect timing. "Karen Whitfield," Sheriff Williams announced, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. "You're under arrest for filing false police reports, insurance fraud, and conspiracy to commit vandalism." The room exploded. Camera flashes lit up Karen's face as she was read her rights in front of the entire community. Her perfectly styled facade crumbled as handcuffs clicked into place, and the woman who terrorized the neighborhood for months was led away in disgrace. The crowd burst into spontaneous applause, not for Karen's arrest, but for justice finally being served. 3 weeks later, the legal dominoes fell exactly as predicted. Karen pled guilty to multiple fraud charges in exchange for probation, community service, and $50,000, 0 cents, in restitution, money that would be distributed among the HOA residents she'd been stealing from. The HOA board voted unanimously to exclude my property from their jurisdiction permanently, along with a formal public apology published in the local newspaper. The criminal case became a cautionary tale studied by property rights lawyers across the state. Detective Rodriguez told me it was the most well-documented harassment case he'd ever seen, and prosecutors used my evidence-gathering techniques as a training example for other victims of HOA abuse. But the real victory wasn't legal, it was personal. 6 months after Karen's arrest, I hosted the first annual Willowbrook Lake Day at my property. What started as a simple neighborhood barbecue turned into a celebration of community healing. Families brought picnic blankets and folding chairs. Kids learned to fish with tackle donated by local sporting goods stores, and the smell of grilled burgers mixed with the clean scent of lake water in the perfect summer evening air. Jim Martinez's granddaughter caught her first bass that day, squealing with delight as the fish jumped and splashed. Mrs. Patterson brought homemade potato salad and regaled everyone with stories of her accounting investigation into Karen's financial crimes. Even Mayor Johnson stopped by to officially thank me for restoring transparency and accountability to local governance. The lake, that had been a source of conflict, became a symbol of what communities could accomplish when good people stood up to bullies. I partnered with the state wildlife department to create an educational program teaching kids about lake ecology and conservation. Every Saturday morning, young families gather at my dock for free fishing lessons and environmental education. The program has become so popular that 3 neighboring counties have asked me to help them start similar initiatives. My electrical business thrived beyond my wildest expectations. The media coverage brought customers from across the region, and my reputation for methodical problem-solving became legendary. I now employ 2 apprentices and have a waiting list for major projects. But perhaps the most satisfying outcome was watching the HOA transform under new leadership. They adopted transparent budgeting, regular audits, and a strict policy against retaliatory enforcement. Property values actually increased after Karen's departure, and the neighborhood developed a genuine sense of community that had been impossible under her reign of terror. 1 year later, I'm sitting on my dock at sunrise, coffee steaming in the cool morning air, listening to the familiar call of loons across the water. The sound of children's laughter drifts from the shoreline where families are arriving for our weekly conservation program. A gentle breeze carries the scent of pine needles and the promise of another perfect day. Karen moved away shortly after her conviction, and nobody misses her. The neighborhood has become what it always could have been, a place where families support each other instead of tearing each other down. 3 other communities have contacted me for help fighting their own HOA corruption cases. Turns out, Karen wasn't unique. She was just the local version of a nationwide problem. I've become an unofficial consultant for property rights victims, teaching them the documentation techniques and legal strategies that worked for me. Next week, I'm testifying before the state legislature about proposed reforms to HOA oversight laws. Funny how standing up to one neighborhood bully turned into a statewide advocacy campaign. But tonight, I've got a different story to tell. You want to hear about the HOA president who tried to steal her neighbor's garden and got destroyed by a 78-year-old grandmother with a law degree? Because that one makes Karen look like an amateur. If you've survived your own HOA nightmare, drop your story in the comments below. I read every single one, and the wildest tales might become future videos. Your experience could help someone else fighting their own neighborhood tyrant. And if you love watching bullies get exactly what they deserve, smash that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. I've got a whole library of David versus Goliath stories where the little guy wins through preparation, patience, and perfect timing. Sometimes, justice tastes as sweet as a perfect morning cup of coffee by a peaceful lake, surrounded by friends who know that standing up to corruption is always worth the fight.